Well, good morning, everyone. We are going to begin with our Education and Culture Committee meeting. Today, we have two items on the agenda. The first one is our fiscal year 21 savings plan. This is a round two. On January 15th, the county executive submitted his recommended savings plan submission, and we're going to receive an update on that today. I know that we are joined by our partners from Montgomery County Public Schools, I think. And so I know that Ms. Stratman is here as well as a few others. We're also going to discuss some of the savings plan related to our public libraries, of which I know Councilmember Jawando is lead. And so Councilmember Jawando, I'm sure you'll have some comments about some of the things there, and especially what we'll need to do as we continue to recover from the global pandemic and get some of our county buildings back open, including our libraries, and what some of our strategies should be around that. I know that Ms. Fiscal, I think she is on the call with us as well. Yes, she is. I see her there. And so that's terrific. So we'll hear from her. I know that from our Office of Management and Budget, we have Ms. Deborah Lambert that's here that can give us some feedback in terms of the county executive's approach. So with that, let me turn it over to both Carolyn Chen and Ms. Nicole Rodriguez Hernandez, who have really laid out a great packet for us in how to navigate this difficult time. Let me just say that at the onset, that this is a tough situation for us. One, because we know that while we have budget challenges, we also need to do more for our schools to ensure that our children are getting the appropriate levels of education, that we're standing up some of the support mechanisms that need to be there to ensure that there's not a huge issue regarding the COVID slide. We know that we've stood up education equity hubs here in Montgomery County, both at the nonprofit level and at the MCPS level. To make sure that some of our students that are struggling have some of those resources that are necessary. And we still know all of that, which all is great intention, still isn't enough. We hear it from our teachers, we hear it from students, we hear it from parents, and so we continue to try and meet that need. And so it will be important for us to continue to strategize, working with our education partners and our nonprofit sector in the community, to continue to come together to find innovative and creative ways in which we can continue to support our students in the acquisition of a high quality education. And so with that, let me turn it over to staff. I don't see any of my colleagues, just as usual, just text me and let me know if you have any comments or questions as we go through the packet, but let me turn it over to council staff to get us started.
Thank you, Mr. Reyes. Good morning, everybody. My name is Carolyn Chen, Legislative Analyst with the County Council. I'm here with Ms. Rodriguez Hernandez. We are going to go over two items today, a quick update on the MCPS savings strategy, and we will go through a discussion on the round two of Montgomery County Public Libraries savings plan for fiscal year 21. So with that, Ms. Rodriguez Hernandez.
Thank you, Ms. Chen. Nicole Rodriguez Hernandez, Legislative Analyst with Council Central Staff. So for Montgomery County Public Schools, Council staff just wanted to help clarify and expand on the County Executive's fiscal year 21 second submission savings plan, where he discusses Montgomery County Public Schools. In his memo, he notes that Montgomery County Public Schools is participating in the fiscal year 21 savings plan by reverting to fund balance $25 million of current year appropriation and reappropriating it into fiscal year 22. So council staff just wanted to note that this is not a typical reduction outlined by the county executive in other departments such as Montgomery County Public Libraries or other county departments. In fact, the superintendent's recommended fiscal year 22 budget that was released in December 22nd, 2020 already noted the reappropriation of $25 million in fiscal year 21 funding to fiscal year 22. And this is a routine action by Montgomery County Public Schools between fiscal years. It's not always $25 million, but last year it was, and I believe the fiscal year before that, it was as well. And in fact, the state law on maintenance of effort does not allow the county to revert that $25 million in fiscal year 21 balance to the county's general fund reserve. Second, as the county executive does note in his memorandum, it does provide some sort of relief in fiscal year 22 because it does lessen the county needed support by $25 million in fiscal year 22. And finally, Montgomery County Public Schools is not required to participate in county savings plan and is not technically participating in this second submission of the fiscal year 21 savings plan either. He's just noting, as reflected in the superintendent's recommended budget, that they are reappropriating or recommending to reappropriate $25 million in fiscal year 21 funding to fiscal year 22. So if there are any questions from the committee, I'm happy to answer them, but otherwise, I think we can move on to libraries.
So let me see if my colleagues, I don't see any comments from them. So we can move forward without objection. So if there's no objection to accepting the $25 million shift in fund balance. So yeah, we're good to go. All right.
All right, thank you, Ms. Rodriguez-Hernandez and Mr. Rice. On to libraries. Let us pop up everyone. So we'll start off with Ms. Fiscal, Director, Montgomery County Public Libraries. Good morning. Mr. Donaldson, Assistant Director, Collection and Technology. Good morning. Mr. Steve Campani, Business Manager, Montgomery County Public Libraries, and Ms. Lambert, Office of Management and Budget. You guys gonna pop? Yeah, all right. And then one more. Okay, we won't force you this early in the morning. I wanted to actually just do a quick intro and then I'll share my screen to go over the budget packet so that it's clear to the millions watching. I wanted to note that public libraries here in Montgomery County has been to me, a great example of how a county department can innovate during a pandemic and be flexible and serve the needs of the community. Or just want to highlight some of the activities that have gone on this past year. We've got workforce development, virtual classes and webinars. Libraries has also featured BIPOC authors and had chats with authors and highlighted local books. They have most recently gone fine free, and that was a huge deal. That press release came out actually after this packet, so it wasn't included. Libraries has also lended your staff to any other COVID relief needed in other departments, and you've also partnered to have 10 Wi-Fi hotspots around the county. So just wanted to show just all the accomplishments that this department has been able to do in the past year, as well as submit 2 savings plans. Okay, so with that, I wanted to just share quickly so that it's clear on where we are getting the information from. So overall, we're starting on page 1. This is a quick summary of the department, the Public Libraries Department budget for FY21, around $42 million. The submitted and approved round 1 savings plan was just under $2 million. Round 2 is just under $1 million, which actually totals for both rounds about $3 million. Moving on, just to show you the structure of how this was laid out. And this is page 3. So the savings of $993,403 were divided into reductions that did not affect service, impact services, and reductions that did. So we have $743,403 that are administrative expense reductions, and number 2, the $250,000 first-time reduction in the library materials budget. We will get back to more information on that, but I want to then highlight this chart, which I think Ms. Rodriguez Fernandez, actually, I stole her chart from the last memo, but this is to show that the many department budget line items of the libraries where they took a second cut to in the round two. I thought that was significant to show that there were additional cuts made to line items that already had been reduced. And then for this round two, a significant amount of new proposed reductions in that total 317,000, which is mainly the 250,000 that the library impacted. Council staff does recommend that we approve what has been recommended by the county executive, but I did want to allow room for comment as well as questions. Ms. Vassallo, do you want to comment on any part of the savings?
Well, Carolyn, let me actually let me turn to our lead for libraries, Councilmember Jawando first. But I did want to certainly echo your appreciation of our libraries that have really stepped up during this pandemic and really migrated to a different level of service in our community, understanding that folks have a special and unique connection to libraries. I harken back to when I was lead for libraries and was very passionate about the role that they play, and so happy to see someone who's equally, if not even more, passionate about libraries than Councilmember Jawando, and taking this on when it came to starting his reading with the community, certainly continuing to stress the need for us to continue to support our libraries in whatever way possible, and recognizing how important they still are, even with their doors closed, and how much of a connection they still have to our community. So with that, let me turn to lead for libraries, Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you, Chairman Rice, and thank you, Ms. Chen and Ms. Nicole Rodriguez Hernandez for the opening. Great to see the library team. This is an auspicious day that I've been with Director Vassallo 2 days in a row. We just restarted my library tours at Little Falls yesterday, and it was my first time in a physical library in a while, and no one was there with me other than the staff, but it was nice to be in the building and to see that. And I think that speaks to your point, Councilman Rice, that the Director Vassallo and her team have been working. They were there, they were masked up, they were probably 10 people came for contactless pickup or drop off at Little Falls while I was there. Things are happening both in person, but a lot online. And Carolyn mentioned I think it's 11 hotspots that are of the libraries that are projecting at the actual spots so that you can be in the parking lot, the 250 MiFis. There's a ton of work that's happened, a ton of online programming, and there's demand for the services. Obviously, when people are dealing with COVID and dealing with isolation and other things, the services that the library has been able to provide are critical. So I want to thank Director Vassallo and Mr. Donaldson and your whole team that's been doing that. I am concerned that particularly on the materials budget cuts that are going to have a direct impact on the service and the wait times that residents who are continue to access the services that the libraries are providing. I don't think that's a good thing at this time, especially when you look in light of Ms. Chen's presentation about the cuts that have already taken place in a relatively small budget that the library has. And so while I understand we all need to tighten our belts, I am concerned that since all this work is still going on, there's demand for the services. Hopefully, as vaccines roll out, there'll be even more demand. I think libraries have the potential to be in serious demand when we come back and people start coming out again, and for a whole range of services, employment, early childhood education, and the like. So I would, we can discuss it as a group, but I just want to signal for my colleagues on the committee that, the furniture, the travel, the postage costs, that makes sense, but I'm concerned about that $250,000 for the materials budget. So I would love to allow Director Vassallo and Ms. Lambert to speak to that, but I'm inclined to not accept that change, but want to hear from my colleagues as well. So thank you, Mr. President.
Excellent. So, and thank you, Councilmember Jawando. I'm going to turn to Councilmember Navarro and then to Director Vassallo to let us know about what that impact may be on their service delivery and the other kinds of services they're trying to provide for the community. So Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And as always, libraries continue to play a pivotal role in our community. We have had so many really productive conversations about the role of libraries, how it has evolved, and the extraordinary need that exists in how they're able to provide on all kinds of different levels, whether it's, folks before that needed to use computers or job search, whether it was for young people that needed to be somewhere where they could have an opportunity to engage in positive activities. I mean, all of that has always been front and center, and the libraries have always adapted to that. And now, once again, they're stepping up in many ways during this really unprecedented moment. So thank you, Ms. Vassallo, and all of the library staff, friends of the library, volunteers, everyone, for continuing to adapt. And not to mention that some of the facilities have been used also for testing. And again, they have completely adapted. And so I wanted to express that appreciation. And, I oftentimes share how as a 10-year-old coming to the United States for the first time for 2 years with my entire family, as my dad went to graduate school, going to the library was just one of the most significant experiences for us, understanding that there was this treasure in the United States of free access to books, that we could, come home with all these books and just, it was like, and it's free. So this is such a pivotal and important component of what makes our country so extraordinary. And so, so I will say that I do agree with Councilmember Jawando. I think that that one particular item surprised me a little bit, because it is true that, we have worked hard to build back from the time when you were hit so disproportionately in many ways, which was the last recession. And this issue of making sure that we're keeping up with enough materials has always been a challenge. So I definitely would be supportive of, not accepting that particular item, because we need to prioritize what are those things that are definitely helping our residents at this moment, and also anticipate demand that is going to be coming. So so anyway, Councilmember Jawando, I agree with your observation. Thank you so much.
And Mr. Wright, if I could just say, and not only are they free, now the fines are free, and that's another just realization of, and I know Director Vassallo will talk about that impact, but that revenue stream, potentially diminishing, but hopefully increasing people's likelihood to come back and return books, which they're already seeing. So thank you, Councilmember Navarro. I appreciate that. Mr. Chairman, go ahead.
Excellent. So Director Vassallo, let me turn it over to you. You've heard a lot, including folks that are already signaling where they may be. So this is great. So let me turn it over to you.
Okay. Good morning, Chair Rice. Good morning, Councilmember Navarro, and of course, Councilmember Jawando, the lead for libraries. Thank you so much for your kind words about the work that MCPL has been doing and continues to do since March 16th, when we had to close our buildings to the public. It is true that libraries are the center of the community in many, many ways. And although our physical buildings are no longer available at this time to the community, we find that we are playing a role in people's lives that is really unprecedented. Right now, and I'm telling people things they probably know already, with our incredible array of virtual programming, over 170 programs each month, reach out to every member of the community. Our Holds to Go service, which is extremely popular, with more than 200,000 appointments for pickup of materials filled since we launched that service in July. My staff is working very, very hard to continue to provide to the community what they need from us in libraries. We have our phone service up and running. We are helping seniors navigate the vaccine process. We are helping people figure out where they can get rental assistance. And then we are still doing the traditional reference services and readers advisory services that public libraries have always provided. So we understand that our role as a Department of County Government is to support the budget that the CE needs to put forward. And we're well aware of the impacts of the pandemic on all of the services that the county offers to residents, particularly those most in need. One of the reasons that we are so pleased that we launched our Fine Free program on February 1st is that we know that library fines impact those least able to pay library fines most significantly. This is well documented. We are not, we're not the first, of course, to go fine free. Over 200 major library systems across the country do not charge fines. Some of them have been in that situation for 10 years or more. So we expect this is going to be an incredible benefit to our community. So in terms of the $250,000 reduction to the collection budget, I would like you all to be very clear about what that will mean in terms of impact to the community. Assistant Director Donaldson, who manages the collection and technology for the library system, is going to give you some more detailed information on the impact of that reduction.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you. So as was indicated in the packet, there would be a service impact to this cut. Our collection management staff has done a phenomenal job of pivoting in response to the pandemic from our traditional purchasing behavior toward the market increase that we've seen in the use of our digital platforms. We've seen a spike across the board for ebooks, online resources, etc., which logically, with people being at home, and with our buildings being closed to the public minus the services that we've discussed. So this cut would really largely be felt in those platforms, most especially our Overdrive ebook platform, which is our most popular. We circulate over 1 million items on that platform alone every year. Now, the way that we think about the spending on that platform is in holds ratios, because that's the sort of way of measuring how long it might take for you to get a book that you're requesting. The industry standard for that is 5 to 1 in terms of how many holds versus copies owned. We are currently only maintaining 9 to 1, so that's almost twice as bad as what it should be. Additional cuts to this budget will make that worse. And so we might see holds ratios more in the neighborhood of 14 to 1, 12 to 1, those types of things, which translates to as long as 10 or 11 months for an individual to wait for a specific material. Now, this will also impact a partnership that we have with MCPS. We have an app that's called Sora, S-O-R-A, and this is an app that the students at MCPS can install to check out the library's ebook collection in conjunction with the schools in support of virtual learning and the hybrid learning that is coming. And so we've already circulated over 20,000 items through that partnership, and we have had to ramp up purchasing in specific areas in support of that. And so our ability to do so would also be impacted.
So we've heard from our folks from the libraries. I do want to give an opportunity for Office of Management and Budget. So Ms. Lambert, if you'd like to chime in at this point, I certainly wanted to give you an opportunity to do that as well.
Yes, I would want Deborah Lambert from the Office of Management and Budget. In the past, when we went through the financial crisis in 2009, 2010, the library budget, just as a point of history, was basically cut in half, from $6 million down to $3 million. So from Office of Management and Budget's perspective, a $6.6 million budget, this reduction would be less than 4%. It was felt that this is a relatively modest reduction to make, and that is why the executive accepted the proposed reductions. So I guess I would offer that as a point of history, as well as the level that we're talking about. And there is a $6.6 million budget that we're dealing with here.
Councilmember, I've got Councilmember Navarro, then Councilmember Joando. Councilmember Navarro. Thank you, Ms. Lambert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Ms. Lambert. Thank you as well. And as someone who has that history front and center every single day, I keep thinking about all the different things that we had to do during the last recession. I appreciate your comments. I think that we also learned a lot from that particular process. And although, and I've said this before as well, I think there were a lot of lessons learned this particular crisis is very different. And I think that for me, there are particular components that are really important and are somehow playing a much more central role than the last time. And so that is why I think that we have got to be very surgical and also remember that there are characteristics from this particular experience that are very different. And so again, as we said before, I think that libraries do provide an outlet, a positive outlet that is connected to a lot of issues around stress and, mental health, activities, parents that are able to, I think, complement their children's education and language development and all of that. This is a pivotal resource that I think during something like this, which for, I think all of us, I know this is my first pandemic, so we don't have a roadmap, but for something like this, it does play, I think, a much more significant role. So I just wanted to express that because I do appreciate the fact that we have to use some type of template, if you will, to navigate this unprecedented time. But again, there are very many different characteristics that we should take into consideration. But thank you so much. I know this is going to be a tough exercise. This is nothing compared to some of the other decisions that we're going to have to make very soon. So I do appreciate that. And as chair of Fiscal Policy Committee, I am very sensitive to what we're doing. But thank you so much.
Yeah.
This is Deborah.
Go ahead, Ms. Lambert.
I would just offer that, our whole approach to this savings plan was to absolutely find non-service impacting cuts. But to be perfectly honest with everybody, we're out of those. This savings plan represents, we're done with the non-service impacting. And so when you're really trying to find savings in a budget, you're really forced to go after those service impacting adjustments. And unfortunately, the materials budget does have some discretion associated with it. And that is why we chose this particular reduction. So I guess I would just offer that additional information.
Yeah, so Ms. Lambert, let me just say that, again, we understand the difficult role, especially those of us who have been here for quite some time. Councilmember Navarro a little bit longer than me. She's got me by a year and some months. But let me just say that we understand that, especially in a time like this, these cuts are not easy to come by. And certainly we've seen it across the board, not just here when it's our libraries, we've seen it when it's Health and Human Services, we've seen it in other departments across the board. So we understand. The difficult decision that we have to make is whether or not we feel that those are conducive with the strategy that's necessary for our community to continue us on the right track. And so it's hard, but it's nothing against OMB. It's nothing against the county executive. You have a tough decision, and that's why he puts it before the council and proposes it. And then we have to make some very difficult decisions and decide which ones are acceptable and which ones we think need to be tweaked some. And so that's where it is. So I just wanted to make sure that OMB understands that we appreciate the difficult position that you and the county executive have found yourselves in. We have a global pandemic that has caused an economic recession. That means that we have minimized revenues that are coming in. And so there's only so much you can go to. And so we get that. But certainly where we have to start prioritizing in terms of what we feel is still important, not only to what we have right now, but how we recover from this pandemic quickly. And so from that perspective, let me turn to our lead for libraries, Councilmember Jawando, who I think may have a motion for us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I also appreciate the difficult position. One thing I'm glad to be a council member. I wouldn't want to be an OMB budget analyst during a savings plan. I know that's not fun. But when you listen to the cuts in service, I think Mr. Donaldson, two very important things. I've been lead for libraries for a little over 2 years. The number one complaint I hear is it takes too long to get my books and I have to wait. And that was before the pandemic. And now we're talking about primarily online. And those wait times, going to 10, 11 months for books. And then you also heard the MCPS, you have that program where students who are going to remain in some form of virtual learning, whether it's hybrid or, while we're still in all virtual, needing to access books, that these are going to have impacts there. Those are not, I think, impacts that we can sustain at a time like this. When we announced Library Lovers Month yesterday or earlier this week, and the fine free, people were so excited because they love their libraries and their interactions. So I just think, while I understand it's a difficult time, this is different than 2008, and that the isolation and the role that libraries are playing. And as I think Councilmember Navarro was, getting at this as well. So appreciate all that. So Mr. Chair, I would like to move that we would not accept the $250,000 reduction in materials budget, but accept the other reductions.
Second.
Excellent. Well, it's been moved and seconded, and since the two movers had seconded, I have no objection, so I don't need to ask for whether there's an objection. So we will accept the $743,403 in reductions that affect administrative expenses and reject the $250,000 reduction from the library's material budget. So let that reflect the will of the committee. All right. I want to say thank you to Ms. Vassallo. Thank you very much to Mr. Donaldson. Thank you to all of our library partners. Thank you, Ms. Lambert. Thank you, Ms. Chen and Ms. Rodriguez-Hernandez. And so we are now dispensed of our FY21 savings plan. So we will move on to our second item, which is a special appropriation for Montgomery County Public Schools in the amount of $750,000 for restorative justice training for our school staff. Today we have with us Ms. Rochelle Rubin, who's the Associate Superintendent of the Office of Student and Family Support and Engagement with Montgomery County Public Schools. We have Karen Stratman, who's the Chief of Staff to our Superintendent with Montgomery County Public Schools. And I'm going to first turn it over to Councilmember Jawando, who proposed this along with Councilmember Reamer to give some background in terms of what they were looking to accomplish. And then I'll turn it over to my colleagues and then to staff. So Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you, Chairman Rice, and good to see everybody here, Ms. Rubins and Ms. Stratman and Craig Howard and everybody. Thank you. Just to remind everyone, this special appropriation was one of three that was introduced by Councilmember Reamer and myself late last year, as part of a package with the school resource officer bill that we introduced to remove the school resource officers, which actually has a public hearing tonight. It's kind of advantageous that these would land on the same day, but also redirect that funding and send the signal that we want to redirect that funding to support restorative justice practices, which the school system has underway as the packet lays out, but that in my discussions with administrators and other school leaders, and I appreciate the budget that was prepared here, that work could be accelerated and be spread to more of the schools and train more staff. And we know from research that restorative justice training, and I know from personal experience, having had my daughter who had a horrible incident at a school where her hand was slammed in a door by a metal door by a fellow student. And we had a restorative justice circle with him and his parents, and we were all crying by the end. And it was a great example of, I think, the focus and the depth and breadth of that programmatic approach to really reduce harm and address the harm that happened and allow both the person who was responsible and the victim in this scenario to have some healing. And it's not a disciplinary approach, And that can be used in a lot of contexts and is used around the country and is used in MCPS, but we need to speed it up. And I think it's directly related to the disparate discipline we see, which I know we're working on, but also the disproportionality in arrests for particularly Black and Latino and students with disabilities. And so I'm interested to hear from the school system. I appreciate they're putting a budget together of how you would use this money. I know there's considerations anytime we give money to MCPS, but I think this is an important pot of money and an important plus up, especially as we look to re-enter school, that we're going to need more of these types of services, more mental health supports, more training to address trauma that we know our students are dealing with in any sort of disciplinary or other types of actions that come from everything that is going on with our kids in our schools right now. So appreciate the opportunity to just frame it a little bit and look forward to the discussion. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much, Councilmember Juando, and thank you for your continued role in terms of pushing for reforms. Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Councilmember Juando, for that framing. I am also very, interested in the ways that we are able, hopefully in collaboration with our school system, the way that we can, in a way, take advantage of this moment in time to redefine a lot of different things. And as I said earlier, I keep having these flashbacks from the time of the recession, but I'm also continually having flashbacks from my time at the Board of Education. It is no secret that my tenure on the Board of Education was an interesting one, because there were a lot of things that I was bringing up that had not been brought up in the past. I happened to serve with then Board Member Irvin, and there were a lot of things that we were pointing out. And many times I feel like I'm just having deja vus on a daily basis, because a lot of these issues were issues that we were addressing, pushing, and really truly working collaboratively, but also pushing ahead to make sure that we would take on some bold steps that had not been considered before. So this piece of restorative justice, which is one that, we really worked on for so many years to make sure that it would be embraced, it is so important that we continue this mantra of scalability, and also that we connect all of the dots. I am moved by this notion that we have to address structures. We have to make sure that we have the appropriate training, the appropriate supports, but also accountability. Because as we are right now debating many different components that, in our opinion, contribute to disproportionality, we have to understand that if in isolation, these components are not going to yield the results that we are looking for. And so I will, share an anecdote. When I was president of the Board of Education, and then Superintendent Jerry Weiss decided to eliminate evening school. And the reason why that was done was because when you looked at the population that was in evening school, it was basically pretty much like 100% Black and brown. And so the issues of discipline and how do you address who owns, these students, who intervenes early on to find access to the resources that many students need. If there are particular, warning signs going on, when do you intervene? What happens? All of that is really hard work. And in my, experience at that time, the elimination of evening school, which was very controversial, was a way to address a structural component. And so I'm pleased that we are thinking about the entirety of what this all means. But at the same time, I will caution that we have got to, everybody has to come to the table with a willingness and an openness and a commitment to address some pieces that will be controversial. But if we do not do that, I think, should be, we should be in many ways, I would say, ashamed that we are failing the majority of the student population of Montgomery County Public Schools in regards to not allowing for the full development of our students' potential. So this piece of restorative justice is really, truly wonderful. And I want to thank MCPS leadership. I want to thank the Board of Education. I want to thank everyone who is committed to this arduous work, because you have to do that. You have to absolutely commit yourself. And so, thank you for indulging me on this framing, but it's just a signal that we have a lot more work to do together. But at the same time, we don't, in my opinion, don't have much time, much leisurely time to move forward. So with that, I look forward to the conversation, and also look forward to the many more topics and areas that I know we're going to be addressing, here forward, to truly get to the bottom of this issue of disproportionality writ large in our school system. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much to Councilmember Navarro and to Councilmember Juando, lead sponsor of this appropriation. Let me just say that I agree with Councilmember Navarro that this is something we've been working on for a very long time. I've been chair of the Education and Culture, then Education Committee for a while now, and we've continued to talk about this in the aspects of school resource officers. It's been one of those continuous conversations in which we were ensuring that officers themselves were trained in these practices, but also wanted to make sure that our schools were as well. It's one of the reasons why during the conversations in the Kerwin Commission that I spent 3 years in enacting policy statewide for what it is that we would see in our schools, that was a key contingent. It was one of the reasons why Dr. Ivory Tolson, who was brought to the commission under my request, to be able to talk about these practices, to talk about equity, to talk about inclusion, to talk about the things that we know are incredibly important to us in moving forward. So it was my expectation that under the aspects of Kerwin, that Montgomery County Public Schools would have been moving in this pathway anyway, excuse me. Sorry. And so I'd love to hear from Ms. Rubin about what the plans were for Montgomery County Public Schools when it came to restorative justice practices, understanding that while the money isn't there and allocated for schools to make sure that they're moving forward with this training, the assumption that these things would be happening at the school level was. And so I'm curious as to whether some of that groundwork had already been undertaken, assuming that the Kerwin bill would have been overturned. But certainly the timing is great in that we have the veto that's before the General Assembly in terms of an override. And so those requirements will begin to kick in and take effect and certainly have an impact on the expectations that we see from our school systems across the state. So with that, let me turn it over to Ms. Rubin.
Good morning, Chairman Rice, Council members Navarro and Juando. Good morning to everyone. Thank you for the opportunity for us to be here to just discuss our work in Montgomery County Public Schools with restorative justice, restorative practices, equity, and disproportionality, because it all comes together under one umbrella. As you mentioned, the work of equity in Montgomery County has been ongoing for 20 some odd years now. And so the work of restorative justice cannot be divorced from that overarching role of how we engage with our students, our parents, our caregivers, our staff members under that umbrella of equity. And the data also calls us to urgency, because within that time, and certainly within the last, I would say 2.5 really, but 3 years overall, that Montgomery County has embraced the work of restorative justice, restorative practices, we have been on the road to really untether and unpack the disproportional data that we see, because we know that when students are being disproportionately disciplined based on race or other implicit biases that exist within the structures of our system, that what happens is that students are not able to meet the academic outcomes that are set forth by the district, but more importantly, the goals and dreams that our students have and that their caregivers and our family and community members have for them to be able to achieve. And so united around that prospect that we would work to really eradicate that from our system has been the work of restorative justice, so that our students are showing up in their full humanity as who they are. When we embarked on the work, we did so under the auspices of a grant with the RAND Foundation. And that called us to identify 43 schools within Montgomery County Public Schools that really would work intentionally around that grant. But as you also are aware, we also thought that it was important for our district to become familiar with that work, to really see the connectivity to equity, and for the entire district to embrace the work. And so we started out with that mindset, and then we have transitioned and evolved and grown to where we are looking at having tier 1 training for the entire district starting in the summer. And that's important and significant because we have never, and especially in this particular space in student and family support and engagement, traditionally we have not had tier 1 training go out. We usually train schools and pockets, of individuals, staff members throughout the system. And as you can imagine, it's difficult to scale doing it in that fashion. So part of our going into tier 1 for not only restorative justice, restorative practices, but also for social emotional learning has to not only do with the ongoing pandemic and struggle for racial justice, but the disproportionality data that we see and that actually needs to be addressed. So where we are currently with the work is that the work has moved to identity work, that we are embroiling all of our staff members. How do we enter into the space? How do we make room for our students to enter into the space? And then how do we manage the decisions that are made? How do we dig around to the structures and the processes that we have in place, including in-school suspension, including suspension, referrals? How do we manage those things, understanding who our students are, who we are as we enter into the space, and we make room for making decisions that are equitable and fair and can really dig into that disproportionality data. So with our tier 1 training, we will have the opportunity to do that, moving more to a restorative district mindset versus the practices, right? Because we understand the practices are important, but if we take a school like Montgomery Village Middle School, where you will see that restorative justice is not the panacea, right? They have equity work going on. They have restorative justice work going on. They have professional learning for their staff on an ongoing basis. They're building around what the learning looks like for everyone. They have peace circles. They have a variety of things that they're doing that all come together to mean we are wrapping around, we're creating a wraparound service for our students and how we respond. And so that's informed our work. When we have taken a look at the data over the course of the last 3 years specifically, what we see is that at the elementary and the middle school level, there has been a significant downward trajectory. For the first time, we worked on enhancing our internal data processes so that we could monitor referral use, but also what was the restorative practice that you put in place in response to that referral, because that concept of recidivism is so important in our work. So if you are responding in a restorative fashion, right, it impedes the student ever getting to the suspension, because what we know about suspensions is that, the more a student is suspended, it increases, their likelihood of coming into contact with the juvenile justice system and we want to stop that. So what we see is that at the middle and elementary schools, currently our elementary schools have a built-in mindfulness component to their work that was instituted as a result of the pandemic. We understand that these times are very different and with the students being at home. And so our data has been interrupted, but what we've seen is that at the secondary middle school level and at the elementary school level, the amount of referrals going down, but the amount of restorative practices going up that the school is implementing. And so our focus is really to work with all of our middle schools and select elementary schools as we really build that structure in to how they are engaging around this work. So the funding that you see us, the funding projection that we've put forth is specific to that goal. At the high school level, what we found is high schools, high stakes, right? We have graduation that is there and looming. We're talking about the academic pieces, but certainly some of the challenges that the high schools encounter are very different, sometimes from their middle and certainly their elementary counterparts. So we are designing a program that is distinct to high school as it pertains to equity, restorative justice, restorative practices. One of the things we have in mind is to build out a diversion program for Montgomery County Public Schools so that we are diverting internally, working certainly with our partners at DHHS. We have a work group that's going on currently that involves a multitude of people. And I say that with the caveat that our work is to eliminate the need for diversion, to eliminate the need for these types of structures. But at the same time, I heard Council Member Navarro speak to this. We have to look at structures and processes as well as coaching and professional learning and ideology and content, and we have to marry those things together. And so if we are still using suspension, because we've never said that for something that really impacts the instructional day and harms students, we have to address those things. But how do we wrap around the services so that we're digging to the root of why that challenging behavior occurred? And what our data has shown us is oftentimes the student is facing some level of mental health, emotional, community, or familial issue that's at the root of that. So at that high school level, looking to implement a diversion program that would have us partner with a multitude of agencies where we would create the structures for where the students go, how they receive their academic support, what wraparound services they need, and then how do we circle them either back into the school that they have left, or perhaps we're looking at how we place them differently, how we structure their schedules differently so that they're still receiving both the academic and the social emotional supports that they need. So that would, we don't have that outlined here because certainly the funding for that goes beyond the $750,000 that's in discussion for today, but we have it in mind to move forward with that. So I hope that gives you like the gestalt of it.
Yeah, it really does, Ms. Rubin. And I really want to applaud you and your leadership role, as well as MCPS, in really tackling this from a different perspective than you ever have been doing before. I will say that I've had children who have now graduated the system, and one is who is in 9th grade, who is working their way through the system as well. And I've seen the changes over the years, but nothing that's committed like this kind of program. And so I will just highlight that. Part of my challenge is that understanding that the work is ongoing. My question for you is that should you not receive the $750,000 appropriation from us, how will that impact the work that you've just described?
So if we do not receive it, our intent is to go back and do what we've had to do over the course of the last few years, which is to look at our existing current resources, both human capital and programmatic, and determine how we scale using what we currently have at our disposal and what we may have to do within 1 year versus 2 years or 3 years. And I say that because I mentioned Montgomery Village Middle School earlier. And if you look at their data trajectory from 16-17 to where they are currently, it's amazing, but it took them about 3 years to actually actualize that work. And systemically, as we look at it, we would have to have the same vision. So perhaps what we would intend to do in 1 year, we would have to spread over the course of 2 years.
Okay. And then, so when it comes to, and I know you know this, that our allocation, anything outside of maintenance or effort goes above and beyond. So that would be tied in. How would that money be utilized? And is the school system committed to ensuring that this money will go to that same use year after year?
So I believe we have built the infrastructure in the system, which in the past we haven't. So we've built the infrastructure around the human capital, so designated staff members to do this work, but then also in how we're training, right? So all of the work has to go down to the school level, all the way into the classroom with the teacher. And that is how we're designing our training structure in the system so that this becomes part of who we are as a system, not just one more thing that we're doing. And so I believe that MCPS is committed to this ongoing work year after year, just various iterations of it, right? Because then we have to get to what do the elementary schools need that is specific to them, and secondary, middle, as well as high.
Okay. Let me turn to Councilmember Navarro and then Councilmember Juanda.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that presentation. So a few observations. I think one of the challenges that we always face when we start programs that are grant funded is that when the grant either runs out, these really amazing best practices go away. So I'm reminded of the Whole Magnet Middle School program, which was really our way to begin to test what the middle school reform was going to be based on. And it was extraordinary. I mean, the results were amazing, right? Because it was whole school and you had these predominantly, schools in areas where there were predominantly Black and brown students, a lot of low income students, and everybody just did so well. But the problem is that with the federal funding went away, that grant, we were not able to continue to implement that at fidelity. It had just kind of like a watered down concept, and therefore, Loiterman, Argyle, those whole school magnets just kind of went away. And so I always lamented that. And so I guess the only thing I would ask is I think it would be wonderful for our committee to get a sense, for us to come back and dedicate an entire session, just one night, on getting a sense of the collection of the programs that MCPS is implementing that are all, sort of focused on this issue of rethinking the way that discipline issues, the rethinking this notion of restorative justice, but also, I know the program La Cultura Cura was one that was just so embraced, and it's just so that, I would like to have an understanding of what is that totality of the programs, and also understand how many, teachers, how many principals, how many students are participating. I'd like to understand the scope. Because again, another issue that I know was always a matter of different opinions in the school system when I was there was this notion that we have schools that we have to tailor these programs, right, to. So, if you had a wonderful Jody Lelick program that you wanted to replicate, Sometimes the comeback was, well, we have to tailor it to the particular school community. And so it was hard to scale up best practices. And to me, that's always been a barrier, I think, for a school system that continues to enroll a very large proportion of students who happen to be the ones affected by this disproportionality. And so I think if we take a step back, at some point we have to also acknowledge that the way that we are approaching these kinds of programs and interventions, et cetera, it's a bit sort of backwards, because we're still doing it as if these are kind of like, great efforts and great initiatives, without realizing that we're talking about the majority of our students. So it should be flipped in how we invest and how we actually embrace these practices, because if not, we will never get to the culture change, the organizational culture change that we keep talking about. And so I just wanted to offer that as an observation, and something that I would be very interested in for a future, not too far in the future, I think, session, to understand that. And then also, and maybe it has to be an HHS EC, also understand what is it that we're doing with the investments that we have put in place in positive youth development, et cetera. We've invested quite a bit, right? Like, just to learn and all of that in order to do almost like what would be an asset mapping, and then identify those gaps. That is work that is absolutely necessary. And, I remember going to conferences where they talk about that, right? That kind of like, almost like an asset mapping of each school to understand what's going on, but then understand the issues of scalability. We might find that we have quite a bit going on and quite a bit already invested, but perhaps we haven't connected all those dots. And also, I think that we need to make sure that our principals and teachers, et cetera, know that these resources are there and are accessing these resources, so that they're able to intervene earlier, right? And not then wait for us to wait until such a student is suspended or expelled, and then kind of try to connect them with some resources. And so these are some of the elements that I would like to discuss in a session that we just dedicate to this. The last piece that I would offer also, and it was another model that I remember being so excited about, that was being actually instituted in a very poor school district in the border, Texas and Mexico. I think it may have been in Paso, I don't remember, but actually this was a school where the principal decided that every single staff member, every single one, including our the service employees, the folks who were cleaning the schools, the cafeteria, everybody had to literally own, have like a number of students that they were responsible for, almost like case management, everybody. And the idea was that you would establish relationships with those students, you would figure out what was going on, in their homes, because they had such limited budget that this principal decided everybody should be doing this. And the academic achievement, the disproportionality, the suspension, all of those metrics just went off the roof in the positive direction. And all they did was literally say to everybody and require that everyone establish a relationship with these students, the families, and be able to intervene early on. And so, again, I just want to throw those things out because resources continue to be a challenge for us, but we have the most amazing resource, which is our human capital. And we have so many people who are so committed. We can do this. But again, it's going to take, quite a bit of some, courageous decisions, as they say. So would love, I support this. I think that I understand the issue of, MOE, et cetera, but I do worry that we do that we have these starts and then we have to stop because the grant money goes away and then you kind of did it halfway, et cetera. And there we are, coming back to the same conversation again. So again, I am supportive. I obviously want to make sure that, that we are incorporating these other sort of like La Cultura Cura and other kinds of things, but then also like to come back for a comprehensive conversation. And I don't know, I mean, if we can do it before budget, that would be great, because we're going to have to, we're facing quite a number of fiscal realities, and we're going to have to make some, I think, very significant decisions. And so the more that we understand the totality of the resources that we have in place and how we can best leverage them, the better off we're going to be, I think, to fulfill all of our goals. Thank you.
Excellent. Let me turn to Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I so appreciate, I was sitting here remembering why this is my favorite committee. And I appreciate the comments from both Councilmember Navarro and Councilmember Rice, and Ms. Rubin, thank you for all your work. So many things to say. I'll start here with one, 1,000% agree on the briefing. I feel like, I know Councilmember Navarro mentioned deja vu. I feel like even in 2 years, I've said multiple times, okay, what's the comprehensive plan? How do we build this out? And you tell us what you need to make it part of the, and then we have to make the decisions. We put our pants on or our blouse on or whatever we put on, and we come into the meeting and we argue to the public what we're going to need, and what tough choices we're going to have to make. But so I really appreciate that. And, and I know my former Department of Ed colleague, Karen Stratman, there's all of these grant programs that we used to put out, and I worked on the Investing in Innovation Fund and the Promised Neighborhoods, and the hope was always that we would seed this money, and then it would become part of the systems change. And you couldn't guarantee it, but that was the hope. And to Councilmember Navarro's point, I think all too often it doesn't. It's just an innovative program. It helps a cohort of students, and then the system isn't changed. And so I think that comprehensive review is really important. And if we're not going to do it now in the midst of these pandemics, the racial and social justice, COVID, and the economic fallout, when are we going to do it? And I do think that would be very, very helpful. It excites me that this could help accelerate the work in the 40 middle schools. And to your point, Ms. Rubin, get this deep embedded, not just at the administrator level, but at the faculty, the teachers, the security staff, which are mentioned in here. So it's a culture. And I so appreciated your point that this isn't a one-time training. We all did racial equity training for 2 days as the leadership of the county. And I won't divulge anything that was said in there, but I can tell you that it was evident to me, and I think to most of us, that was a starting point, not an ending point. We needed to continue that work, both personally and collectively, to make sure that it becomes a part of the DNA of our county government, and in this case, of the system. And so the realization that this money will need to be going forward. And that's why I think it's important to put it in the budget and say, yes, we know it's going to have a fiscal impact going forward, but that's what it has to do if it's going to become a part of our culture and the way we do business all the time and the way we support students. And realizing $750,000 is not enough, right? It was connected to the school resource officer issue, but and it'll help with the middle schools. But as you mentioned, this program you're talking about, which sounds very exciting, and I want to hear more about the diversion program in the high schools, and what we do in elementary schools, that's going to cost money. We're going to have to understand what that needs to be on an ongoing basis, and we'll have those discussions between the federal government, state, and obviously what we do here at the county. So I really appreciate the support for this and the eye towards changing this structure. I didn't mention I mentioned my daughter's restorative justice, the circle we had. I didn't mention that the other young man was a young little Black boy. And I thought about what would have happened and what I saw happen growing up here in Montgomery County earlier to kids that did things like slam a door or get in a fight or, disrupt a class, who I saw get suspended, and I won't say or not whether I was one of those kids, but how we've started to change. And it just made me so happy that didn't happen to this little Black boy and that we were able to come to a solution. So it's urgent. I get emotional about it.
It is emotional.
Take your
It
time.
is.
Take your time.
It is extremely. It's life changing.
Yeah, so I appreciate it. It's urgent that we do it. We have to take steps now. This is a drop in the bucket, but it's an important drop. The middle school level is very important. So I really appreciate the thoughtfulness that went into the proposal. And at the appropriate time, I would like to move that we accept it. But thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to all the folks at MCPS.
Well, Councilmember Joando, it is the appropriate time. And so we have a motion. I'm assuming Councilmember Navarro. We have a second.
Second.
All right, terrific. Let me just say a couple things. When I first got a hold of Dr. Toldson, it was well before my assignment to the Kerwin Commission, and it was his Breaking Barriers report. And Councilmember Joando, I know you'll remember this all too well because it was under the leadership of President Obama at the time and trying to understand the disparities in the school to prison pipeline. One of the things that you so passionately and eloquently just stated that you're trying to see us disrupt. And one of the things that they highlighted as a part of that, both his original report and his second Breaking Barriers 2 report, dealt with the fact that when it comes to the zero tolerance policies that are in our schools, that really then have our schools handling their very minor offenses with law enforcement is part of the challenge. And so we need to be real and honest about it as we have this conversation around what it is that we want to see. That part of it is internal inside the school system. And I've said that many times. I've said it at public forums, and I'll say it again. An officer responds to what a person asks them to do. And so if we have administrators, if we have teachers that are overreacting, if we have them that are using racial and implicit bias to make decisions in terms of how they're handling disciplinary situations, that is a key contributor. As the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation found through its championing of this report to the school to prison pipeline. If we can break that part, then it creates a significant disruption to a lot of the other results that we see, i.e. students being arrested that are primarily Black males, all of the other things that we see that are happening that no one disputes are happening. The question is, how do we disrupt that? And this is an integral part in terms of that disruption. From my perspective, it was always that the school system should have been doing this before. I understand with the constraints that are there from a fiscal perspective in terms of us asking the school system to do a myriad of things, that this allows for us to accelerate that work. And so because of that, I certainly support and think that this is the right thing for us to do. I would just encourage us as well as we are thinking about this, and I agree with both what Councilmember Navarro proposed or requested and Councilmember Joando seconded. We do need to understand all of these different programs that are out and what it is that they are doing and how effective they have been. Should we be ramping up additional support and spreading them to other parts of the county if we see their success? Those are the kinds of things we really need to start benchmarking and understanding a lot of what is going on when it comes to ensuring that equity, that racial equity and social justice in our schools. So it's a great idea. So I'll ask staff to go ahead and look at an opportunity for us to schedule something like that and ask our school system to be on the ready to be able to present to us, to let us know and give us that snapshot of what it is that's going on, but also what our future plans are for how we're going to continue to address the need. I will just close by saying this. We changed our Council Member for a Day program. Council Member for a Day program had asked folks to, weigh in about things that they were interested in their community and write a paper. And this year we changed it to Voices. And it really is something that encompasses our students talking about things that they care about in their community that they want to see changed, but from a storytelling perspective, making sure that as a part of the healing process, it is important to tell your story. And so we did that intentionally because of all the stories that we continue to hear, whether it's folks fighting on the front lines of racial injustice, whether folks that were fighting on the front lines of ensuring that people who were affected by this pandemic, those who are oftentimes marginalized and underserved, would get help from those in that very community who are also marginalized and underserved. This is the power of that kind of process that we see, that our school system has to continue to support and lift up to empower our students to be a part of this. And that's what a lot of these circles do, and understanding your responsibility and role in your community with people who oftentimes may look like you, to be able to say, these are the things that we can do together to lift us all up. So again, I just really want to say thank you to my colleagues. Councilmember Navarro, you're next. But just really want to say this is the beginning of a lot of conversation around what our expectations are of what we want to see happen in a myriad of departments throughout the county, and MCPS is no exception. So with that, Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you, Councilmember Rice. A lot is always discussed in the realm of what does it mean to be a public, an elected official, or what is politics? What's the formula? What do you do, et cetera? And I feel like so many times as we engage in these very difficult conversations about budgets and things like that, there is this void, there's this void regarding being completely transparent with regards to what it means to be an elected official of color, what it means to be in a leadership position within these very important organizations, especially when you are a person of color. And the fact is that we all walk around every day doing our job and making tough decisions and responding to all of our constituents. But there's no doubt that there's always this additional weight that you carry because you understand on a very basic level what happens and what doesn't happen and the consequences, which are so extraordinary. And I wanted to say that because I do think sometimes we forget and we don't acknowledge that part. Just last night, I happened to join an IG, live IG, where they were interviewing people who had just been released from detention centers, from ICE detention centers. These were Venezuelans, and this was an Afro-Venezuelan boxer who in Venezuela had been a champion, young man, 25 years old, and he had just been released with that GPS thing on your ankle and was describing the experience. And for those that don't know, Venezuela has the highest number of people seeking asylum because of all the atrocities that are happening in that country. But it was that human level conversation where we were all saying, what do you need? What can we send you? This is part of a network that is helping folks when they're released. And he just kept saying, I'm embarrassed. I really don't like to ask for anything. Somebody who had nothing. And I say that because it reminds me also of a conversation with a teacher at what was then Broad Acres Elementary School when I was on the board, and I showed up for a meeting and it was the wrong day. But then I decided to walk the halls and happened to go into a Mets classroom. And there was this teacher who was in his early 40s, a white male. And he was kind enough to sit with me and kind of, tell me a little bit about his classroom and who the students were. And he showed me this file folder of the stories. Councilmember Rice, we're talking about telling your story. Every student would tell their story and would draw renderings of their story. And he started telling me about this beautiful, beautiful young girl who I believe came from Sierra Leone. And when she was, a toddler, her entire family was basically murdered because of wars. And she as a toddler was actually burned. Her arms were burned. And he showed me that story, her story. And she said she wanted to be a doctor because she wanted to help those who had suffered. And this, 40-something white male teacher broke down and began sobbing, right? We're in the back of the room, an assistant teacher is helping. And I'm just, I took that file, I asked if I could have it. And I remember using this file folder for such a long time. Every time we had to face a budget cycle that was very difficult, et cetera, I would remember those stories, because we need to remember when school gets back into session that those beautiful faces of those beautiful children who are walking in those hallways, we have no idea the type of trauma, the everyday things that they face, the microaggressions that build, and what that does to your spirit. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about children's spirits. And so I have to, number one, take my hat off to MCPS for all that they have tried to do and continue to do to address these issues, while at the same time, I have to say that we have to continually hold ourselves accountable for the responsibility that it is to respond and to offer a bridge to both people that came from other places fleeing wars like that, but also to our kids, our children who were born here and face structural racism, which is as hideous as many of these other issues. And so I believe that, these are important moments in time in our country and in our world. And we are called, I believe, we're called to be here in this moment, to make some significant changes, paradigm shifts, not incremental things, but paradigm shifts. I believe that we do have the willingness, the resources, and already we have in place many, many things. We just need to then do that hard work on pulling it all together and prioritizing, because if not, we will all be affected by all of this. So thank you for indulging me. I know that a lot of times we don't really get into a lot of deep stuff like this, but I think it's important because it is as important as to what goes into a packet. It really, we are called, I think, in this moment more than ever to examine from that kind of spiritual level what it is that we are going to do to position this county for the next level. And I thank you, because all of you do your part every single day to get us there. So I look forward to the session, and I think, especially when we do come together for that session, any ideas that you might have for how do we then pull together all of these programs, all of these resources, and what else could we do in an innovative fashion to realign and redeploy would be awesome. Especially looking at like the Kennedy cluster model that I still wish we could implement at Fidelity. But that type of approach is something that I hope that we can all embrace. Thank you.
So, Councilmember Navarro, I want to pick up on that last thing that you said, because I want our school system to just reflect on this for a moment. And I want to thank our staff. We did this a little bit differently, so we're not going to walk through the packet as much, but I read the packet ahead of time, as I know my colleagues did. And so from a financial perspective, I know that the school system still has money as a part of its fund balance that has not been allocated. And so what I would like to see is exactly what Councilmember Navarro framed, is that as we come back for this additional meeting, how we can utilize some of that funding, some of that $3.5 million outside of the $25 million that's already been saved, to make sure that we can help to enhance some of these programs that we know are working well and need to be expanded throughout the county. So again, that was my reasoning for asking the questions at the beginning, because I know that as a part of our large school system budget, we have money that's there, but I think that it is important in this time and space to delineate and make sure that people see that we are committed, and to make sure that that is the framing of how this money is going in, to showcase that this is something that we are prioritizing and needs to be done in its true fidelity, in its quickest fashion possible, ramping out to as many students as possible. So I completely support where it is that we are as a committee. But I will say this, that there's more that needs to be done, and we have the money to do it currently in our budget. So we need to be strategizing about how we make that happen. That is incredibly important for us. So I really want to thank my colleagues. It is not easy to do what colleagues did today, which is, as you heard from Councilmember Navarro, open themselves up. You know, you see folks who are on this Zoom that are crying. And those tears are tears of happiness about progress that we've made, but also tears of pain and suffering that many have experienced over their lifetimes. So I want people to understand and appreciate what it is that is going on with our constituents, because our representatives come from the community. We are just like you. We happen to have decided to put ourselves out there and run for office, but we're no different. We have the same life experiences, whether it's in our own personal experiences or familial experiences that shape us, that give us some of the insight into what's happening in our communities. You know, it's always one in which elected officials, and I love what Councilmember Navarro said, because it's that elected officials are somehow seen as different. The only difference is that we have volunteered to give up more of ourselves to try and make a difference in our communities, much of which many people do in their own respects, but not in as much of a public nature as what we do. And so to then be able to do things like this and make sure that people see why we are prioritizing this is important. And I promise you, there are people right now that are going to be saying, why are we wasting money on the school system in terms of these kinds of practices? They will go to Twitter, they will go to social media and criticize us for not focusing on the things that we need to focus on. Those kinds of things happen. And I just want to, again, truly thank my colleagues for standing up and standing out, making sure that people see that elected officials are people too. We have feelings. We have wants, we have cares, we love, we hurt. And I hope that people respect and understand that. Because if they do, we'll have an even better representative government where children can see themselves advocating, telling their stories, making changes in their communities, and doing the same thing that we're doing, fighting for other people who oftentimes are less fortunate than themselves. That's what the job is. And so I really just want to, again, say kudos to my colleagues for doing that job so well. So with that, we have a joint, we have a unanimous committee recommendation to support the $750,000. That will be reported to the full council. I really want to thank Mr. Howard and Ms. Rodriguez-Hernandez. Unfortunately, this is one in which your packet did all it needed to, and we found ourselves where we needed to find ourselves. I want to thank Ms. Rubin and Ms. Stratman, great partners, for continuing to put forth the work that is necessary. And with that, I don't see any other, Councilmember Juando, I apologize.
No, I just thank you. I think I started my first cry of 2021 out and started the very important comments by both you and Councilmember Navarro. So really appreciate it and look forward to the future work. And thank you to Mr. Howard and Ms. Rodriguez-Hernandez as well. The packet was very well done. Thank you.
All right. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, we are adjourned. Take care. Stay safe. God bless, guys.
Take care, everybody.
That you did introduce the same day of the State of the County address. Of course, it addresses school construction from MCPS, addresses child care facilities.